Hi, this is another one of my videos. This is about the Tetragrammaton art, zero-point energy and gravity, ancient languages of light. Also, this song is by the music of the spheres, by Greg Fox. It says Carmen of the Spheres. Oh, anyway, this is Egyptian depiction of the Ark, and then it's similar. As you could see the cherubim that were atop of the Ark. And I was studying it, and then I looked down by their wings, and you could see that this is really a depiction of the Egyptian Tetragrammaton that Kircher found. And what I also noticed, and then it'll get into deeper detail, is there seems to be a coil underneath, so it seems this was some kind of device. And then you could see the same eyes. When there's two eyes, it represents the Tetragrammaton. And then another, as you could see, and the rectangle, you could see it could be depicted as the vector equilibrium. Here's the Egyptian arc again, and the vector equilibrium with 12 circles radiating from one point. This is the Tetragrammaton with the 4 letters. This is an example of the Tetragrammaton and radiating. And you could see the little equilateral, or it's not equilateral, it's the 3 by 4 by 5. It'll be mentioned a lot more. I'm not sure if this is readable, but talks about the music of the spheres and the mundane monochord. And this is the King's Chamber, which is 10 by 20. Another 3 by 4 by 5 triangle. And as you can see, it's all a depiction of an octave, just like the Holy of Holies. And then here's.
But the way I was reading the Old Testament, it was quite different. It didn't describe God in such a way. It described it in something much more close to what my studies were about. And I was stunned by that. For instance, in the Bible, you can find the description I've got as some kind of equilateral triangle on a throne, right? It had to do with geometry. And I was stunned by that. I mean, it wasn't an old man considering me as a sinner, but it was some kind of geometry that was described as the throne of God, the point of interaction between human and God. And there was various allusion to it in very specific parts of the Bible. And eventually I saw that they were describing as well these angels that radiated in this tetrahedron, and describing it as like crystal seas and all sorts of things that made me think of technologies and geometries and physics much more than some old guy with a beer on a throne. And I was surprised. That's not what I had remembered. And I continued to study it, and I realized that the Old Testament is ambiguous because the Old Testament described God not as something that's somewhere in the sky or anything. It describes God as an object. It describes that they have some kind of link or communication with God through an object that they call the Ark of the Covenant of God. And they weren't kidding about that. I mean, when you read the Bible and with archaeologists find, they actually built one of the largest temple in the world, the Temple of Solomon, to put this object in the middle. It was a very, very large temple with extraordinary large stones. And it was this ark object had to be shielded from everybody else. And it was enclosed in this Holy of Holies in the center of the Temple of Solomon that was surrounded with concentric walls, very thick walls, in which initiates had to go through very specific initiation level to be able to go from one wall to the other. And only the few could ever go into the Holy of Holies. And they describe all sorts of things that happen if you went in the Holy of Holies or in the tabernacle without having gone through all the appropriate levels of initiation. If you weren't ready, it didn't seem like it was a pretty sight when you came out, right? And if you did. And so I was intrigued with that. I was looking at many of these plates where they showed this ark object, this box that had gold on the outside, gold on the inside, and wood in the middle. And right away I realized that's got to be a capacitor. And sure enough, if you do a box like that, you can generate large capacitance. Capacitors are like batteries. They hold energy. They hold charge. And then the difference between a capacitor and a battery is that a capacitor can discharge extremely rapidly, where a battery cannot. And so capacitors are used in all sorts of electronics today. But basically, there are an electrical, a dielectric, and an electrical plate, which creates like a container for energy. So, and this large arc capacitor was described as having a sphere or thing in the middle of it that was very radiant. Like they describe how they had to shield themselves from it. And they had to wear very specific clothing to go in there. And that if they didn't, they would come out of there with a sunburn, basically, like burnt into their face and so on. But then I kind of came across something. What happened is I thought, but wait a minute, they're calling this the Ark of the Covenant of God. And I was like, well, what does God mean? And so I was looking for an answer to that, and I did a lot of research, and I couldn't find exactly, this Yahweh and all this, and I couldn't find exactly, and then eventually I actually just opened the preface of my Bible by error or something. I started reading it, and I found the answer. And it says right here that the name Yahweh, the divine name Yahweh, YHWH, is currently the translation or is used as the Greek terminology, the Tetragrammaton. Now, for a guy like me, when you are reading one of the most, sacred books on the planet, I guess, and the person is describing God, and the translation is Tetragrammaton, okay? I'm starting to have ideas. Can you, okay. You guys probably can see where I'm going there, right? I was stunned. Imagine that. Every time you read the word God in the Bible, you could translate Tetragrammaton. So you could replace all the gods and lords in the Bible to Tetragrammaton. And then you get a really different reading. Okay? It's like, oh my Tetragrammaton. And so I looked at the epimology of this, and I thought, well, the word tetragrammaton is typically, if you look at the root word, the tetra refers to four, right? The four faces of a tetrahedron. Typically, the translation is then done as tetra for four, grammaton for grammar. And grammar or letters is interchangeable, and so it's the four letters of God. Yahweh, Y-H-W-H. And grammaton was what was intriguing me, so I digged a little deeper, and I found that actually the word grammaton has a deeper root than grammar, in which it refers to the weight of an object, and that's where the word gravity and gram came out of. So all of a sudden, you could have a different interpretation of this word that says tetrahedron gravitation, right? Okay, something along those lines, right? I know that might sound very, a long leap, right? But this was where I started. And I was really keen on continuing my research because it was promising. They were talking about tetrahedrons or triangles on the seat of God, and they were describing tetragrammatons for the force of God. And I was getting, inspired, to say the least. So I continued to research, and with this word tetragrammaton, I was able to look further and dig deeper, and I was intrigued. There's a lot of sacred societies that have a lot of information and all this. One of them, and certainly there seemed to be an oral tradition that was passed in the rabbinic tradition from one to the other throughout the ages, that wasn't allowed to be written. It was very clear in the Bible that the name of God or the source of God, whatever this God was not allowed to be just discussed publicly. It was very sacred, and it had to be transferred from one initiate to the other in very sacred way. And its traditions that transferred the information were called Kabbalistic traditions. So I started to study the Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic tradition and what they had to say about the Tetragrammaton. And when I did, I came across various esoteric manuscripts that we're going to see in a minute. But the other thing that puzzled me is that in many instances, the word Tetragrammaton and Ark of the Covenant and all this, in the description of what was going on there, it was describing something very interesting to me, because it kept on talking about the force of God, or the Tetragrammaton, having a vortex of fire or a vortex of clouds above it. And it describes it in the Bible in various instances. And it says that, that is where the power of God is manifest to man. And for instance, in this graphic, they show this is when the Hebrews were going through the desert for 40 years. They had a temporary tent system to host the ark in the middle, and they called the tabernacle. And they show here the vortex of cloud rising above the Ark of the Covenant that's in the back of the tabernacle. Just so you understand, this is the fire of sacrifices that are in front, and you see the smoke just dispersed. But in this case, it's very organized vortex type of smoke or clouds that orbit on the top of this object. From my previous studies and from my physics concepts, I had come to conclude that, for instance, the black sun or the black crystal described in other civilization may have been given by the sun god to humans as a very advanced technology, like a little sun in a box, a singularity created artificially inside a stone or a crystal that contained plasma dynamics spinning at high angular velocity, generating a torque in space-time, producing gravitational effects and energy effects. If that is true, then you would expect that on the top and the bottom of that structure, you would see vortices appear, columns of clouds or columns of light appear because of the high velocity of the space-time angular momentum along the side of that object. At the north and south pole of that object, large vortices would be produced. There's a chapter here if you want references, so you can look it up yourself in Numbers. It's called the cloud above the tabernacle, and it described that vortex cloud above the tabernacle. There's chapters where the sons of Aaron get struck by the Ark of the Covenant and die, and Moses is called into the tabernacle and instructed to never let anybody go in there without permission, because the vortex of the Ark of the Covenant, if it is not dealt with appropriately, can kill. There's all sorts of things like that happen in the Bible that, were striking. But the thing is that I started to realize that when you read the Bible, the Ark of the Covenant, this box-like object, was supposed to have been built at the foot of Mount Sinai after Moses crossed the Red Sea. So I was confused because when I read the crossing of the Red Sea, I was struck that it said here, by day the Lord went ahead of them. They are going towards the Red Sea, fleeing from Egypt. It says, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night left in its place in front of the people. So it's describing Moses following this vortex of cloud, and at night it would light up, this vortex of fire, through the desert going towards the Red Sea. But the description of the same vorticular action and the same description of this cloud thing, the cloud pillar, is given when it's describing the Ark of the Covenant. So I realized, wait a minute, maybe the Word of God, the information of God that was not allowed to be discussed, was the part about the source of the energy of the ark, not the box. The box was built afterwards to put that energy source in it so they could travel through 40 years in the desert. I started to think maybe these are two different objects. And Moses is following something, a power source, something that's creating a vortex in space, and it's coming out of Egypt. And then I realized, wait a minute, Moses was son of Pharaoh for 40 years, initiated in the highest level of initiation of the Egyptian, before he realized that he was Hebrew and left with the tribes of Israel. So if there was a power source, if the pyramids of Egypt were not just built to bury pharaohs, which I believe weren't built to do that at all, and were actually shielding device or resonating cavities, resonating space-time in a very specific geometric structure, but that they were missing their power source at the center. So I took the dimensioning of the Ark of the Covenant as given in the Bible. It's quite precise. And I got the dimensioning of the inside of the sarcophagus in the Grand Pyramid of Giza. And it was a perfect match. That is, if you have the Ark of the Covenant built, you will be able to lower that box into the sarcophagus of the Grand Pyramid of Giza, okay? And it will fit perfectly on the side and perfectly on the length so that you can lower it with the poles and push the poles in, which are telescopic on the Ark. And then I realized that the inside volume inside the sarcophagus is exactly half of the outside volume of that sarcophagus. Exactly, I mean, very highly precisely. And if you take the dimensions of the Ark, then you get exactly half the volume of the inside of the sarcophagus. And then if you take the dimension of the inside of the Ark, you get exactly half of the outside dimensions of the Ark. So you get perfect octaves of cavity or resonance cavity inside the sarcophagus. So I started to think, maybe this object is not an Hebrew object. Maybe this object actually got taken out of Egypt by Moses when he left with the Israelites. And that might be a reason why after the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh of Egypt, allowed Moses to leave, all of a sudden realized that he was taking off with the power source and changed his mind and went after him. All right, that's very interesting. I'm starting to have a better picture of what's going on. I'm extrapolating, and I got some supporting evidence later. We'll see it, but I started to study ancient Egyptian texts to see if there was any evidence of that, and I found plenty. But one thing that struck me is that there's a story about a king of Egypt, a pharaoh, that's on a lake with his wife, and she loses a very precious, beautiful bracelet in the lake. And the pharaoh and the wife is quite distraught, and the pharaoh really wants to do something about it. And so the story goes to say that they call the high priest of Egypt, and they come and they open the waters of the lake to find the bracelet and give it back to the queen. And I thought, sounds like these guys, hundreds of years before Moses, were doing things similar to open the Red Sea. Now, imagine that you had the power of gravitation under your control. You could do things like stopping the course of water, okay, and opening channels. You could push things around. So I started to think about it, but when I read Exodus and the crossing of the Red Sea, I saw no evidence. It just says that Moses went to the front of the sea, raised his staff, opened his arm, and the thing opened, right? So I'm like, wow, that's some serious stuff you got going. And then I came across something that was much more descriptive. And that's typically lost by the scholars. In this chapter, it's called Joshua. In Joshua is much later after Moses. They've gone through the desert. Moses is now gone, is dead. And Joshua is in charge of the Israelites. and they arrive upon the Jordan, which is a large river, especially when it's running at flood level, and they mention in here that it is running at flood level, and they need to cross the river, and they don't know how to do it. At the time, there was no bridges, and so they are in a conundrum, and Joshua is instructed to take the ark and put all the high priests on the ark, and then walk the ark into the Jordan. It's got the parting of the Jordan. And in this case, it's quite descriptive. It's quite amazing. It says, and the priests came out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner they had set their feet on dry ground than the water of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. So here, it's quite very, very direct about using the ark to actually stop the course of the water of the Jordan, let the tribes of Israel go through, and then as soon as they got out of there, the gravitational field, or whatever you want to call it, allowed the water to start running again. One thing that's really omitted is the paragraph right after, or shortly after. Paragraph 23, for the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. Remember, the Lord is the Tetragrammaton, described as the Ark of the Covenant. The Lord your God did to the Jordan just what it had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. In this paragraph, very specifically, it says that the reason the Red Sea was crossed and opened up is because it was the Ark of the Covenant that was used to do it. The reason why this is typically omitted is because all scholars believe that the Ark box was built after the crossing of the Red Sea at the foot of Mount Sinai. But the source power of that Ark box might have come right out of Egypt. And that might have been the power source of a technology much more advanced than anything we can dream of today. All right, so now I was able to place that the ark had been used to open the Red Sea and then open the Jordan, and then later it's used to make the walls of Jericho fall, and then eventually is placed in the Temple of Solomon in the Holy of Holies, and is actually the center worship of all of these Israelites. Today, the rock on which the ark used to be in the middle of the Temple of Solomon is under the dome of the rock in Jerusalem, which is controlled by Islamic tradition. So the Islamic tradition actually are controlling and consider that place a very holy place, because it said that Muhammad ascended from that central place in the Temple of Solomon. So now you've got Islamic tradition and Hebraic tradition crossing over at the Ark of the Covenant. And these people have been fighting for so long. And so I continued to study, and something opened up. There's a whole set of information that opened up that we are not going to be able to go through tonight. We're going to go through some, but that leads from the Egyptian to the Hebrews, to the Muslim, to the Templars, to the Middle Age, to modern age, to America, and right to the $1 bill. And that set of knowledge has been leading and powering our governments for a very long time. I think there is much more to what's going on that has to do with the search for this power. Eventually, I came across these things. They're called the Copper Scrolls. Again, Edgar Cayce, interestingly, in one of his esoteric reading, mentioned that scholars were going to find in the 70s, or I can't remember when, scrolls from a hidden society along the Dead Sea. Nobody really believed it. Scholars said, well, we know pretty well everything that was around there. There's no reason to believe there would be scrolls there or things like that. And sure enough, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, hidden in caves near Qumran. And a whole society of priests that were unknown until then to scholars, and that seemed to have been very reclusive, very hidden society. In those Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in those caves, there is one set of scroll that was completely different than the other ones. Why? Because they were written on copper, not on typical hides or papyrus or anything like that. They were written on copper, and when the copper of these scrolls were analyzed, it was found that it is the purest copper ever found on earth. All right? And when they decoded these scrolls, the way the scrolls are written, they're written backwards or upside down so that you were supposed to roll clay around them and then unroll, and then you'd have the clay tablet, which would have it right side up. But when they opened them, they didn't realize that, so many of them cracked. So anyway, they decoded them, and they found that the text on the scrolls describes the Ark of the Covenant coming to the Essene community of the Qumran region. The Essene that wrote these scrolls say to have had possession of the Ark of the Covenant. And it described 64 components of this that needed to be around the Ark in order for everything to be okay. So there's all sorts of components that have to do with oils that you anoint yourself before you walk into the Ark room, with incense that has very specific herbs that you need to cleanse yourself with before you go into the Ark room. All sorts of components that came with the Ark of the Covenant. And not only does it describe these 64 components, it says where they hid them in the mountains near Qumran. When these scrolls were found and made public, it scared a lot of scholars because they thought, oh my God, this is like a treasure hunt. People are going to try to come and dig everywhere. And, so there was a lot of publicity that these scrolls, although they were from that period of time and found with the other scrolls, may have been a hoax that was perpetuated then. And, just to throw everybody off, this was unlikely for many other people. And basically, they were trying to discourage people from going to dig around out there. But a person was allowed to dig, and this person went through the channels. Is called Wendell Jones, and he dug in the Qumran region and eventually found one of the first item on the list, which was the oil that you had to anoint yourself, which increased conductivity on the skin, by the way, in order to go into the Ark room. And Wendell eventually found a second item as well, based on the description that he was reading from these scrolls and going into using the clues and finding them in the Qumran region. So let's take a look.
Wendell Jones is respected here and abroad as a credible Torah teacher. He has been featured as a speaker in Orthodox synagogues nationwide and has represented the Israel Foreign Ministry in a 2-year lecture forum on college panels in discussions with PLO representatives. Wendell was contracted by the Israeli government to write for their academic courses for tour guides at Hebrew University. In 1952, Wendell came across a news story that was to change his life. It was the account of the discovery of the Copper Scrolls. He was plagued by the realization that there were many anti-Jewish statements in the Gospels, and some were, as the marginal notes stated, omitted in more ancient manuscripts.
Did not surrender to be a preacher. I felt like I wanted to approach the Bible scientifically.
It is so fitting that the Shemen Afar Shimon should be the first item found from the days of the temple. When the pilgrims were ascending to Jerusalem, before they were in view of the Holy Temple, they would smell the fragrance of the Shemen Afar Shimon. The pilgrims knew that shortly they would behold the glories of Beit HaMikdash in the holiest of holy cities, Jerusalem, in the land of Judea.
Jones has been scouring the ancient caves of Qumran for the past quarter century.
The news of this discovery soon broke internationally, with coverage from CNN, CBS, NBC, and ABC. That following year, the October issue of National Geographic featured the find, followed by the December issue of Omni magazine, and countless other news sources carried the story worldwide. In the spring of 1992, the authenticity of the Copper Scroll was further enhanced with the discovery by Institute teams of a silo in the bedrock containing some reddish material, organic in nature. It was analyzed by the Weizmann Institute and 2 departments at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. The testing indicated the reddish material was a compound of 11 ingredients found in the Ketoret.
I have absolutely no doubt this material is Piton HaTorah.
This was the Holy Temple incense.
If we continue to find the items listed in the Copper Scroll and continue to locate them in the order that they're listed in the Torah, then the next thing we should find is the ashes of the red heifer. All things will be restored, as even the Torah that Moses broke. Remember, he placed them back into the ark and God restored them. Moses wrote a Torah like the stones in the ark. Christian art has pictured the Torah as 2 tombstones, but that's not how they're described. In the book of Exodus, chapter 32 and verse 15, we read, "And Moses went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of testimony." In Hebrew it reads, luchot, not slabs, but sapphires. These were dihexagonal shaped like the sapphire molecule.
That last part is really important. Is revealing information that doesn't quite match the Christian interpretation of the Torah, where Moses is not said to have come down from the mountain with tablets with the 10 commands on it, but actually sapphire type or crystalline type of structures that were hexagonal in nature. When a guy like me hears stuff like that, the fact that Wendell Jones has been able to find and locate these things in the mountains of Qumran supports the concept that the ark was a true object. That this is not just some crazy story from an ancient book, but actually that this really happened. And that the civilizations or the communities at Qumran had access, in any case, had at one point or another the Ark of the Covenant in their midst. Now, how could that be? Well, it's found that, imagine that you had an object of extreme power in the center temple, and this might make you understand a little more why all these wars have been raging in that section of the world for so long. Imagine that you had this amazing power, this amazing object at the center of your temple, but that your town, your city, your defense system could fail, and this object could fall in the hands of other civilization that wouldn't necessarily understand how to deal with it. You would have, I'm sure, an exit plan, a B plan. And I believe that their B plan was they had a community of high priests fairly far away from the temple, that where high priests were constantly being trained in the order to be able to handle the Ark of the Covenant, so that if anything happened at the temple, the Ark would be swiftly taken out through underground tunnels, and many of them have been found now, that would bring them out of the city and bring it to their temple, to their place, so that they could handle it there and keep it safe. And that might be why no writing about that community was found by scholars for a very long time. Nobody knew they were there, either than this Bedouin that threw a rock in a cave, heard a pot break, and thought there may be something in there, and eventually found the Dead Sea Scrolls. So all of a sudden, it starts to make sense, and I was getting a better picture of what might have happened. Now, interestingly, there's new evidence that's coming out, and well, there's a few things. One of them is that most of the writings of Qumran, most of the Dead Sea Scrolls, are not allowed to be released to the public. Only, I believe, 100 scrolls have been released to the public, and the rest is not has not been released to the public at all. I find that interesting. I wonder why. But certainly, the fact is that there is evidence that Joseph and Mary, the parents of the one that was actually called Emmanuel in the Bible, the name of Jesus came later on, but in the Bible it's very specifically said to be Emmanuel, were Essene and were from the Essene community. So imagine this child coming into the field of this extremely powerful object and growing into the field of it. Imagine having an object that is like a transducer for the power of space-time, all the information of the universe in that point. When you're close to it, there's a lot of information transduction that's going through your DNA. That could make you be able to do things that the average human beings cannot do. It's like a little torque on your space-time reality. All right? And certainly walking on water is evidence of gravitational effects.
At a recent press conference, famous videographer James Cameron and filmmaker Simcha Jakovovicki presented a controversial documentary called The Last Tomb of Jesus. The research reports on an ancient family tomb found under a construction site and documented by archaeologists in 1980. The controversy comes from the cluster of names that was discovered engraved on some of the ossuaries. One of the most prominent inscriptions reads, Joshua, son of Joseph, or Jesus, son of Joseph. Another bears the inscription Maria, or the modern Maria, and yet another read Marianni Mara in Greek, which may correspond to Mary Magdalena, as Marianne is the name found in the Acts of Philip to describe her. Though the names found on some of the ossuaries are common, it is significant to find all of these names with biblical references clustered in the same family tomb. More significant for our purposes is that it seems that many ossuaries of the first-century Judea Christians bared a very specific geometric configuration. For example, the ossuary marked Marianni Mara bears very defined geometric decorations that in the context of our research have extreme significance. Indeed, once again we find the very structure of the cube octahedron or vector equilibrium engraved on an ancient artifact. It is even carved in such a way that the lobes or petal structures of the matrix are apparent in 3D. The same typical geometry is found on other ossuaries, one of which is marked Judah, son of Joshua. Certainly the claim that Mary Magdalena and Joshua may have had a child is controversial, but the symbols that are found on these ossuaries and others from the 1st century A.D. have striking significance. It is as well significant to note that both the one called Joshua or Emmanuel and Mary Magdalena were in some traditions considered to be a representation of the living ark. These symbols, as well as we have seen earlier, are found in many different traditions, and specifically in the Egyptian Osirian temple. This temple is associated with the resurrection of Osiris, with the help of his consort Isis, and may denote the structure of space-time and some of the most powerful and profound knowledge of the time. Significantly above the entrance of the tomb was a unique facade, a carefully crafted chevron and circle that mystified the archaeologists. In the words of Dr. Shimon Gibson, one of the archaeologists present at the opening of the tomb, "There's no doubt about it that those symbols meant something. It's unlikely that the family or the person that came and carved out the tomb just carved these things at random. They had to symbolize something. What they symbolized, I don't know, but it's quite rare to find that kind of ornamentation on a simple tomb." Interestingly, thousands of years prior, at the beginning of the Pyramid Age, a mysterious conical stone, deemed to have cosmic origins, is found in ancient Egyptian traditions. The Bin stone was housed in the Temple of the Phoenix and was associated with regeneration, rebirth, and celestial cycles, and was thought to be the divine seed. The Bin stone disappeared long before Herodotus, an earlier Greek historian, visited Egypt, but not before it had relegated its name to the apex stone placed on top of pyramids or obelisks. One such example was found from the pyramid of Amenemhet III and is housed at the Cairo Museum. It bears the inscription, "King Amenemhet III sees the beauty of the sun. He sees the Lord of the horizon sailing in his boat over the sky." Would this be the Lord of the event horizon flying in his ship in the sky? Interestingly, this most sacred object is almost a perfect match to the so-called chevron found at the entrance of what may be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of our time. The chevron and circle is typical of the symbology of the ancient Egyptian all-seeing eye. Again, we see that this most important symbol in the Egyptian tradition was used to describe a fractional series from half to the magic fractional structure 1/64. The symbol is as well found as representation of ultimate power on the top altar of Mayan temples, and is depicted on walls in various ancient locations of the Americas.
I continued to study some more, and I realized that Tetragrammaton in Kabbalistic tradition is typically denoted or described as this triangle structure with in this case, the letters of God in it. And if you actually look at the way the letters of God are laid out in it, it's like an isotropic vector metric. Okay? So 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's 4 layers to the isotropic vector metric, if you took the first layer here, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 on the bottom, 3 in the middle, 2 here, and then 1 on top. Just like the way these letters are laid. And the Kabbalistic tradition are very clear that you shouldn't take the letters at face value, that actually each letter has a mathematical number attached to it, and that it's the numbers that have a meaning as well. So if you look at the numbers of the Tetragrammaton, then it's 10, 5, 10, 6, 5, 10, and 5, 6, 5, 10, and they all add up to 72. And sure enough, in the Bible and various texts, you find that the number of God is 72, or the number of faces of God, or the great name of God is 72. So it all works. It's really nice. The thing is that this is only a male God. It's missing its better half. Remember? It's missing its polarity. And so, imagine that you wanted to leave a code on a planet that's not so evolved, but you wanted to leave the code so that it would give them great power at an important time in history. But you wanted to make sure that it could not be decoded until they were ready for it. How would you do it? When maybe one way you would do it would be to give the code in a polarity way, so that you would have to have a civilization come to the realization of the qualities of polarity before they could decode the code. So, and that would most likely be a society that's ready for that type of power. So, when you take the male Tetragrammaton and you add the female one, or the positive and the negative one, then you have to add a second isotropic vector metric. So the result is that you would have to double this number. 72 twice is 144. 144 is in the book of Revelation as a very important number for the new and the changes of the new world. When you put 64 tetrahedrons together and you get this fractal vectorial array, you get exactly 144 faces on its outside surface. And so that was getting compelling. But the Kabbalistics didn't stop there. The Kabbalistic traditions said, well, actually, if you want to truly understand the power of the Tetragrammaton, the power of God, if you want to understand the root of creation, you must decode this tree, which was thought to be the tree of knowledge, which is analogous to the tree at the center of the Garden of Eden. This was thought to be the foundation of creation, and that if anyone could decode this, they would hold the key to creation. There's a lot of writing in Kabbalistic tradition that says as well that it shouldn't be attempted to be decoded because most people that have gone crazy. And so I took those warnings seriously, and I thought, well, I'm most likely already crazy. Well, I live in a van, you know. I'm studying all this crazy stuff. I must be okay, you know. It won't hurt me that much. So I went at it. And I studied and I studied and I studied and I tried to figure it out. And I couldn't really figure it out. I was really bugging on it because it was getting so complex. So many texts I was reading about this were so complex and so philosophical, and they had all these realms and dimensions and all this. I couldn't figure it out. And then I decided to draw it, and I plastered it on the ceiling of my van so that when I would wake up in the morning, I could just stare at it and try to figure it out. And so I'm in the van in the morning, and I look at it, and then, fairly rapidly I realize that there's a tetrahedron on the bottom of it. Okay? This part here is a tetrahedron, if it's seen in 3D. And then I looked up here, and I realized that in 3D, those lines would generate as well a noctahedron. See, the thing is that most people don't see this thing as a 3D object. So flatten, it makes not much sense. But in 3D, it describes very specific geometry. So because I had this type of 3D mind, and I was always very intended on not doing the flat thing, I was trying to visualize this in 3D. But I couldn't figure out this middle box thing. I just couldn't figure it out. For weeks, months. Just like, laying in my bed looking at this thing and studying and all this. And then one day, I said, wait a minute. I realized that one of those boxes in the middle here, okay, matches the box in the top portion of the octahedron. So I thought, what if I slid the middle part box in the upper box and see what it generates? So I split them in two, and then I slid the bottom part into the top part. And when I did so, it was like a key, right? It just locked in and generated all the vectors necessary to have a tetrahedron and an octahedron, one on top of each other. So now I had all these vertices for 3D geometry. These are the only geometry necessary to produce a 64 tetrahedron grid. So I knew I was close. So I got really excited, and I continued studying and intensely studying, and I realized something is that the Kabbalistic text doesn't say there's one tree at the root of foundation, the foundation of the universe, or at the root of the universe. There is 4 trees at the root of the universe. And they said that the 4 trees were attached at the same root. Now I thought, well, wait a minute. Maybe they're still giving us only half the code. Maybe there's 8 trees, and they're only giving us the polarity, the half polarity of the code. I looked at my structure again that I had come up with from sliding the bottom into the top, and I realized I had extra lines. And these extra lines match the lines to generate the star tetrahedron. So if I got all the branches of the tree, and then I attach the 8 trees together, I would have 8 star tetrahedrons coming together to generate the 64 tetrahedron grid. And what told me had decoded this right was that by the time I was finished, I could now plaster the Kabbalistic tree right over top of the 64 tetrahedron grid and get all the 9s of the 2D tree out of the 3D geometry. It worked. And hooked all together, it generated all the intersection necessary to build a 64 tetrahedron grid. And when I calculated this, then I saw that it could be done in many different ways. But one thing that was for sure, the Kabbalistic text said actually there's 10 spheres. They're called sephirots, and they come from the word sapphire. Okay? So actually it's talking about crystals again. And it says that these sephirots are the joints between the pathways of creation. And it said that there was this 10 sephirot to one tree, but because they're all hooked to the same center, to the same root, which is called the crown sephirot, which is described as a point of indwelling where God falls or God goes towards infinity. Okay? Basically describing a singularity. When they say that one doesn't count, so you get 9 sephirot per tree. Well, if you have 8 trees, and you've got 9 sephirot per trees, 8 by 9 is 72, and now you're right back to the 72 powers of God, and the code has brought you all the way back to the beginning in a feedback loop of coding information. And so I continue to find the solution to this. We did a small animation on how the trees come together, and it's literally the trees compressing together, creating that collapse into singularity, generating the code. It's quite amazing. Then it generates all the joints necessary to produce the 64 tetrahedron grid. So I wrote a little thing on this. It's an old book I wrote. It was all my findings on ancient civilization. I didn't write anything on. I wrote some physics in there, but just layman physics because I wasn't prepared yet for that. And the day I was writing this part of this little booklet that some people here have, that day, while writing this, I decided to log on to the net and look at what is happening in the crop circle world, and sure enough, that crop circle occurred that day. That was freaky. So it really, was an amazing journey through this information of the Bible and the codes of ancient civilization all around. And I really was taken by it. And it was so confirming, and it just took, and every step of the way, it just kept on confirming. And, in this short presentation, yeah, I don't have time to go through all the details. I do give week-long presentations where, we have time to go through all the details of things. And even then, in a week, I usually still run out of time. But there's so many of this amazing confirmation that came along the path. Every step, every time I would doubt, something else would come out and grab me and show me the way. And and it brought me to a very different view of not only our past, but our possibility in the future, and how we move from here to the next level, how this change that so many of us are feeling on the planet is going to occur, and how we can help it, and how we can help ourselves through it. to this day, I'm finding stuff. I mean, it's amazing. There's so much stuff out there that relates to this. It's almost like there's nothing else. And in case of this being correct, then there isn't really anything else. There is this amazing structure of the vacuum that generates reality as we see it, that generates our existence, and it basically oozes out of us throughout our civilization, throughout our understanding, throughout our physics, throughout our advanced thinking, and it really brings us to a different way of relating the world. And in this way of relating into the world, and that's where I believe that the New Testament and the Old Testament comes together. Because I believe that the Old Testament is talking about very advanced technology, and that the New Testament is talking about where you have to be in being able to have this level of technology. And that when the two come together, then you have a complete being, you have a complete master, you have a civilization that has reached levels of masteries in which they have an equilibrium between their external world and their internal world. They have understood that they hold singularity, that they are in contact with the universe within their existence, even within their physical existence, which is made from subatomic mini black holes connecting all things together. And from that perspective, a civilization would build a completely new sets of technology, a completely new set of interaction in its civilization, of relationship with each other, and certainly realize their common goal and their common aspiration. I always say this, this model tells us really that the surface of a planet is like an event horizon from which each individual is a little sun ray, right? And that sun ray has a very specific vector direction in space in which it gathers a very specific set of information. However, all of our feet are pointing to the same singularity, to the same center, and connecting us all. And that singularity holds us on the surface of this planet as our gravitational field. And if we get to this, I believe we can develop technology out of this that will bring us to the stars. And I think, that's my understanding at this point, that this is the crucial time to be able to transcend our way of doing things to the way that we need to be able to do things in order to survive the changes that are coming into our solar system and move to the next level of interaction, and maybe even connect with other civilizations that have been in our galaxy, that have been observing us, that have been waiting for us to graduate and enter a larger community, a larger galactic community, and move on from here. So, thank you very much for all your attention today. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alright, this is talking about the possible origin of the Hebrew alphabet as a sacred script used by adepts. And it's talking about how the light is shown through the pyramid capstone and they got the shapes. So then, I'm trying to save time on these so it'd be easy to upload, but if you Can't read them in time, just pause it. This is one of the pyramids artifacts found in Ecuador, and it has weird qualities, like it lights up in a black light. It has 13 steps, and I think that symbolizes the 12 points radiating from the vector equilibrium, as can be seen here. And a lot of the ancient mathematics, they had to have been seen from a 2D structure of a shadow depicted on the ground, projected on the ground, and then that's how you could come to know the hyper. This is Nassim Haramein's heliocentric theory, and I was thinking of the Venus exlimagos, where it makes a pentagram, and I was thinking it, and then it reminded me, I bet it's stretched out, and then it's weird, and then I had a vision of this, and then that's the hypertetrahedra. And then this is the bottom of the pyramid. It says the son of the creator comes. And then this is the bent pyramid. I thought they look pretty similar. So then, like, I was wondering if this is an example of the hypertetrahedra, and you see if you made it into a 2D object, it'd reflect that onto the ground or something, and then it's kind of going on a limb, but I just made these more connections, see if I could find like the 2D skeleton that would be seen in a shadow if this was a 2D to a 4D figure. I almost thought it's a depiction of the hypertetrahedron, and probably an example of the human body, which the ancients, they compare it to the, or no, this is another Ecuadorian artifact found. There's 12 cups and then one in the center, and they all have varying degrees of volume, and they all fit in the cup, and it reminded me of the rainbow, where each frequency is part of the light ray, and you combine them both and you get a white light. And then here are the platonic solids, which are color coded, and then they all nest within the platonic solids within a vesica passes, and then sealed the universe in 6 directions. And this is the cube of space with a tarot key as well. And this is the hypercube as well, and the octave is on the outside, and it's Pythagorean. And this is from the Kybalion. It's a Hermetic writing, and they're talking about vibration. And this is a pretty awesome crop circle. It has 11, 11, 11, and that's 33, and it's known in societies. And this is a really cool picture. It shows a thumb, and it's like a segment of the vortex, and it's chiral. And then here's examples of the Hebrew language on how they'd fit around a spiral. And you see it mentions a rainbow serpent. I guess it used to be still active in ancient times, and the Mayans probably sacrificed to it after Quetzalcoatl left. And this is a book that's about this. And here's like a morphogenic scalar wave going through the Great Pyramid, and Dr. J.D. Nelson and his wife, they produced a Kirlian photograph of the pyramid, passing energy through a Tesla coil in 1979. And what's interesting is it has a copper top, and then I looked in the DNA teleportation video, and they had a copper thing passing through it.
We have been talking about the energy aspect of the pyramids a lot. And obviously we need technical engineering minds for that. Now in front of us today is David Adrievich, who is the electrical engineer, and he obtained his Master of Sciences in Physics. So he combines several different scientific disciplines in his mind, which is very interesting, and I encourage you to give him a warm welcome to this topic, exotic energy of pyramids.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to my independent research of the energy from the pyramids. I tried to research it from the scientific point of view, but I would like to present you some of the either speculation of mine or possibilities which can be led to our next experiments. So, next slide please. We started with a structure that is triangular, that looks like a pyramid. Somebody says it's a hill, but we know it has construction material. It is a great geometric object, which has its properties not only of the geometry, but orientation and the mass. And what first comes in our mind in this situation is that that could be a kind of either device or antenna, because the question would be, if there is some ancient civilization who built that, did it build it so large and big only for the purpose to manifest the power of the civilization, but could that be another more practical purpose, more economical, whatever, that justifies building of structure like that? Well, when we have a structure with a geometry, with some kind of relations between space and the material, which is built in layers in a manner that repeatedly follows a pattern either circular or alternating layers, one layer from the stone, clay, and so on. Then we can say it could it could be used to collect the environmental energy from the ground, from the outside. We don't know exactly where it comes from, but it could come from many places. And with the complex interaction of the material inside, please give me a slide. It could create a radiation of electromagnetic field which Dr. Slobodan Mizrak has actually measured a few years, maybe 2 years ago. Next slide. And what we found from that, and we come to the conclusion that with the complex interaction of the magnetospheric and piezoelectric effects in the materials which consists of, in the materials from which a pyramid consists of, a wave could be created. A wave is a manifestation of energy stored in a built structure which has a certain geometric, conductive, capacitive and inductive properties which could be obtained by carefully choosing the materials of the pyramid to build. The first theories were that it is a piezoelectric effect coming from the vibration on the ground. So we have let's say, macro earthquakes that happen all the time in the ground. Everything is vibrating in some way. And crystals, for example, quartz or something, if it is carefully aligned, can create electric field just from the mechanical acting on it. But it would be difficult to be built because we should have to align all the crystals in the spiral structure around the pyramid, coming like a coil from bottom to the top. The simplest way to do it is to use the magnetostriction effect. This is a similar effect to the piezoelectric when you are using mechanical force to a material that has something like iron, nickel stuff that is magnetic. If you hit it with mechanical force, it will produce the magnetic fields. So mechanical forces, if they come just from above and resonate this thing as a nonlinear oscillator, I will explain it later, the oscillator, we will create the magnetic fields coming along the beam that you see above, and this is what we can measure with our instruments. The next slide. I was looking in my research, what can I find with the other cultures and the other pyramids? Do they have some documentation or something that we can use in order to explain? This is the Dendera temple in the Egypt, which has inscription and carving stones that could have interpretation of the device that is electrical. Next slide. This is a carving in a stone. Let's consider this is a structure like a bulb or something, and there are silhouettes or symbols of the figures like that, and snake inside and some strange symbols here. Well, let's look about to the next slide. It is maybe more intuitive here, because one of the German museum have built a device, replica, which of course nobody knows did it really look like that, but this is what we have seen on the picture. You have seen the bulb and some snakes, a box with something inside, and a couple of the batteries. This is a bucket of batteries. You can have a few metals, two metals and some kind of vinegar or whatever, and you can produce electricity. So brute force doesn't work on this device, and what is most intriguing here is the symbol like that. This one, the next slide, is a jet pillar. Jet pillar is a symbol used in pre-dynastic times in the ancient Egypt. Nobody really knows what did it represent initially. Later it was explained by the spine of Osiris or something, but I think that it should have some more technological meaning. This is the only symbol in this picture that resembles very symbolic and very schematic, like we use it on the normal electrical engineering. So I was looking at that symbol in this time, in this way. Let's say we have some kind of a wave, and the wave could have some kind of a length. So the complete height of this structure or symbol is determined of one wavelength. And these four divisions here are indicating division of the wavelength by 4. And this is the quarter wave resonator, in my opinion, schematically shown as a symbol. Next symbol. The purpose of the quarter wave resonator is the main function of the antenna. This quarter wave resonator is able to store energy in form of electromagnetic vibration for a longer time. Okay, this time is microseconds or some milliseconds, but it can store it and build a standing wave inside of it, which has special properties. Special properties of the wave is that With large current and low voltage on the bottom, we can produce enormous electric field on the top. Resonator like that can influence other resonators not directly connected to electric field, electric source of power, and the other resonator will, due to the standing wave that is created in the space, start resonating as well. The other example is what happens when we don't have the correct frequency. Only the correct frequency creates quarter wave resonance. This is a half wave resonance, and this is no resonance here. Next slide. This is a probable description of how of two jet pillars have been used as two resonators to transfer energy from one to another. So, in my opinion, this one should be the transmitter. There is a arc symbol symbolizing that they are meaning it seriously. Don't approach the device too close, away in the space. And this is a receiver. Some people or statues can then either utilize energy or whatever. I have done some Tesla wireless experiments, which actually gave me idea of all this about. On the next slide is my experiment when I have built a homemade lambda quarter wave resonator. This one is transmitter. In proximity of the transmitter, a lamp could be lit just by approaching the transmitter. No other wiring is needed. And this is the receiver. A lamp in the receiver can light if the receiver is grounded. As well grounded should be the transmitter too. They both are grounded by this radiator. But you can ground it anyhow. You don't need direct wiring in order for this to be lit. Next slide. This is the schematics of what it is actually. The generator, the coil of the transmitter, the capacitor. This is schematically shown as if the air becomes conductive in the presence of the wave. Actually, air doesn't get conductive at all. The real transmission is going through the ground. This is a reflection of conductivity in the ground.
What really caught my eyes on the transceiver, you could see the double eyes, the jet eyes. When they're both together, they symbolize like a frequency of the Tetragrammaton, I think. And as you can see, there's another depiction and then another comparison right here. Wherever they're both depicted, it's like a equilibrium in their own symbolic language, it seems. And it's basically just going through another comparison. And then on the previous video where they talked about the transistor capacitor, I noticed it looked a lot like the things on the bottom below the two cherubim. And then I realized they're probably the exact same thing if you compare closer. You see they're almost like it's mechanical. And then I don't know who made this, but it's talking about the electric energy field that allowed them to carry and build the pyramids. And then the next photo it's of a 60-pound ball being levitated by frequencies from Dr. Hutchison. Or here's another Ankh depiction. And then raising the Djed, or the Jed pillar. I'm not sure if this is readable. I might have to transcript it.
Here we are at Saqqara. This is the famous step pyramid of Djoser. Djoser is a title to the king of the third dynasty, 2900 BC, roughly, said the books. The step pyramid is located in a big courtyard, much older than the pyramid itself. And you can compare yourself with the same eye. You look at the pyramid and you look at the wall, you can see the difference.
These chunks of stone in front of Hakim are quartz crystal.
Then it reflects the crystal tile on the ground. This is what's left of it. This has been quarried by the natives in the area in the 17th century.
We see the remains of a quartz floor at Giza in the temple to the east of the second pyramid.
Now I'm pointing the jade pillar, which is symbolizing one of the ancient gods, Osiris. And jade is the word we still use to address the older people, like grandmother and grandfather, jade. It goes back to the story of Osiris and his brother Seth, the bad guy, who put Osiris in a coffin, threw him in the ocean. The ocean took him place Phoenicia, Lebanon today, and there is the cedar tree grows, and the roots of the cedar tree captured this coffin. There it has been found by his beloved sister Isis. She cried, her tears touch his body, and they live together again for a short while, short enough to make a baby with the name of Horus.
The story of Isis, Osiris, and Horus is fundamental to Egyptian cosmology. Isis is connected to the star Sirius, and Osiris is connected to the constellation of Orion. Horus is their prodigal son.
I'm going to take you now to see that hospital, the healing with the sound.
Stories about ancient healing techniques were passed down from generation to generation by the elders. Hakim explains how sound played a part in diagnosing and healing patients.
That line of construction you see like 3 chambers, it's what's left of the house of the spirit. And it's a healing system with a sound. It's a medical investigation table. And the patient have the right to use either side of the stairs. One on the right, one on the left. So he have to follow, or she have to follow her own antenna to climb up there and choose the point where she stands. Because each point is connected to a cheek chamber. We have 22 of them, 11 on each side, no ceiling. And when you go inside, you can see a niche where the physician put his head in the niche to see what's the matter with his patient laying on this table. And that works with the sound. And the sound, the source is running water in a tunnel underneath here. So it's a big map of tunnels underneath here.
Let's consider that the pyramid sites along the Band of Peace are sophisticated harmonic structures, not only mirroring positions of the stars, but designed to replicate harmonic cavities of the human body. It seems that the chambers in the pyramids are harmonically tuned to a specific frequency or musical tone. Sound healing techniques were used to restore the patient's body to the correct harmonic within. This is the view of Abu Sir to the north of Saqqara, and here is the view of Dashur to the south.
Here we are on location at the Bent Pyramid. What you'll notice here is that the construction has two angles.
Traditional Egyptologists will tell you that the Egyptians were practicing building pyramids, and they started building at one angle, then changed their minds partway through. This is the kind of thinking that paints the ancient Egyptians as infantile and misguided. But is there another way of looking at it?
We call these constructions at that area in Dashur related to king called Senefru.
At Dashur, there are 3 pyramids with 3 burial chambers in each, 9 in total. Traditional Egyptology tells us that the entire site was built by Sneferu. If the established story that the pyramids are tombs is correct, why would Sneferu have needed so many?
Sneferu would have had 9 different possibilities and options for where he would have been buried, which again is illogical. So this comes back to the fact that understanding the Egyptians in terms of traditional Egyptology means that they were misguided and illogical. I don't think this was the case.
Now, when you come to the word Seneferu, sin means double. Nefer is harmony, so it's double harmony. It's not a name of a person, but it's the energy we get from these constructions.
Let's consider that the pyramid sites along the Band of Peace are sophisticated harmonic structures. It seems that the chambers in the pyramids were harmonically tuned to different frequencies or musical tones.
The Bent Pyramid, it has 2 chambers for 2 different sounds.
Each chamber in each pyramid, then, could be exemplifying sound technology with distinct tones, creating huge fields of harmonic resonance.
What's interesting is the Great Pyramid really has 8 sides to it, and this is an explanation right here. And it seems similar to the shape of a superconductor, as if the shape of the pyramid was an actual conducer of the energy. And then here's a crop circle in a magnetic field pattern. And this is a Thoth time temple, and it shows when the intersection of the heaven and earth energies. And this reminds me of the, if you combine them both, it'd be like the Enneagram reflected in itself. And this is a crop circle that is similar to the concept, like a as you could see, you have to have resonant, mutually reinforcing waves, and it reminded me of this crop circle, and it's an example of, it reminds me of an example of a galaxy in the same code that it formed within a vesica Pisces, like it formed the basic pattern of the galaxy, and then if you deflect it around, if you imagine like a Pong game or something, and it seems to like deflect nicely into this pattern. And I'm wondering if it could be like, since there's 10 lines, if it could be related to the Kabbalah. You see, I just did the Roji Biv, and then the last 3 lines, 7 colors plus 3 white lines. And the little dots are possibly the planets, like the little node points between frequency vibrations where planets would coalesce within the whole electromagnetic sphere of the sun, which goes way past the planets. And then here's the platonic solids around a pentagram, and then Metatron's cube with the flower of life in the middle. And then here's Metatron. As you can see, that the star Devo to project as a cube onto a surface from its shadow. And then the Metatron, supposedly Metatron is Enoch transfigured, and then it seems like it'd be synonymous to the lesser face in Kabbalah as compared to the greater face of the greater pattern, the Tetragrammaton. Another example of the octave. And then here is square into the circle, or the feminine and masculine, heaven and earth. As you can see, like it generates down into a pattern that mathematically correlates with more complicated patterns. And the octave, as you can see, were mentioned previously. And all these temples seem to be the ancients' knowledge of mind, of the mind and the body, consciousness, with as above, so below, pretty much. Like all the structures reflected the macrocosm connected to the microcosm, like a fractal of a giant universal, like holographic body or mind. And here's the planetary alignment of the Great Pyramids as a depiction of the same code. And then here's where Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Sun, lines up. And then here's another key where the Egyptians were measuring time and space with their own volume and whatever. And right here, I was studying the Sefer Yetzirah, and I was trying, which, remember, Nassim Haramein said the Sefer is representative of the Sapphire, and I tried to make the face, and that, as well as put the 22 sides around a sphere, but I couldn't actually do it. And here's Pythagoras with his 2 by 3, or was it 3 by 4 by 5 triangle? And then you could see it right here within the Great Pyramid. And the Great Pyramid is an example of the octave of the Holy of Holies. So then I found this and I flipped it upside down, and it reminded me of like the mouth of, and as you can see, I just drew the lip and the chin from 2. If you think about it, when you get 3 of them intersecting, you get the 2, the nostril part. And then I was studying this, and I'll decode all 3, the connections in later videos, but this really caught my eye. And then, because it looked like pretty much like this, whatever, it's some kind of hemisphere bowl or some kind of light refraction, or I can't remember where it's from. If anybody knows, just leave it in the comments. Here's another connection I found, and it has something to do with the planets. I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but it represents the planets, some kind of astrological. And here's the comparison to the Kabbalah Tree of Life. And I tried to match them up, and it seemed like it fit somewhat. Maybe I'm going out on a limb too much, but it seemed like an interesting correlation. And then it really struck me as similar to the Mandelbrot set, where it's like a fractal as well. And then it's basically the symmetry of the flower of life with concentric circles. Then I realized, I wonder if it's related to the Lagrange points. And then I flipped it over, and then it seemed similar, maybe, possibly. So back to the Ecuador pyramid, it seems like the ancients, they left all this stuff, and it eventually be decoded, and like this, the vector equilibrium plus the vesica Pisces, whatever, with the eye in the middle, could be what the pyramid of the capstone is trying to say. Like, it's the mathematic that the ancients used was their unified field theory. And this is another Ecuador. I think it's a macrocosm coming out into the microcosm, or vice versa. And this is magnetic in the middle, and then it's similar to this nebula. And then here's a crop circle, which is similar to a magnet, as you can see right here. Donut shaped magnet produced this, and then it seems to be fractal as well, as you can see larger and larger triangles. As you can see, as long as you have enough energy to pump in it, then it'll expand, and then it'll be fractal, and this would probably go into like a 6-sided hexagon pyramid. And then what's interesting is across cultures, the symbol for water, and it also could mean electromagnetic force, energy. And then here's the Cialdini figures, and it's more like a one-dimensional, since it's one wave, and then here we have the same, it's one wave as well, but if you combine two waves, it'll form the more complex figures, such as the Jenny experiments. And this is the copy from the Roswell glyph found, and they seem to depict like code symbols of energy and matter behavior, which are similar to this, which are the effects of electrons within a electron cloud or something. And then this is found in Egypt in comparison to the Roswell beam, the same symbols, which possibly are actual depictions of light and sound and matter and the same language that would possibly go on between the neuron firing of brain, between neurons, electrochemical language, and then as you can see, reiterating it's the segments of possibly of a spiral. That was a divine language. What's pretty interesting here is that scientists are figuring out that the same language, the same coding of DNA is almost similar to the syntax of language. And his studies are on disease propagation, which makes me think, I wonder if they're like AIDS could be harmonically tuned out of the body. And then this is a comment, and then it reminded me of the Einstein-Rosen bridge detected in DNA as like radiation, and then it seems like a macrocosmic fractal connection. This also reminded me of the Norway spiral. And I don't know the legitimate claim of the video, if it actually is that, but it seems like it could be. But this footage is really crappy, but you could, if I get a better clip, you could see two different spirals in opposite waves, like one is inside the other. It's like a bluish on the inside, and it's opening looks like a portal. This is another Ecuadorian artifact, and it's magnetic in the middle, so it's a depiction of probably the vortex within a tetrahedron. And it reminded me of this. It's the same pattern, the Norris spiral, and there's a crop circle exactly like this. And it reminded me of the Egyptian, I'll just get onto that after. And then here's like a yin yang depiction of the winter solstice, summer solstice, and then this is a video from Danny Wilten or something, but I'd like to credit him. And then it seemed like a similar connection like that. So then it reminded me of the Egyptian eye, so I kind of put them in the segments that the Egyptian eye would be, as in the Eye of Ra and its depicted divisions, and it seemed like it fit like similar, like the middle and the two sides of the eye, as in like 1/4, 1/2, and 1/16. It seems like it's doubling, and then I compared it to the vortex eye, and it reminded me of what I drew on my basketball, and it's like the yin yang with the eye and like a bunch of little yin yang swimming around. Anyway, that's my video, and this is some more 64 tetrahedron, vector equilibrium, crop circles. Anyway, just put your comments and questions, and also I'll probably be posting more stuff pretty soon. I have a lot more stuff to post. This is just kind of a small part of it.